do you see the seeds of moral progress happening now? Can you see where, in the sense that you talk about how 100 years ago things were vastly different to how they are now? What are things that you think might change 100 years from now?
Well, that's a very nice question. I mean, my feeling is probably a widening of what Peter Singer calls the expanding circle.
Yeah.
So if we go back a few centuries, people of different races were regarded as inferior, not even human, and were treated accordingly, appallingly. And so I suppose the obvious extrapolation of that is the widening of the expanding circle to non-human species.
Now, Singer talks about how you can make an evolutionary case about why it makes sense to care about fellow creatures, when a lot of people would intuitively say that if evolution serves the self, which of course it serves the gene, but people see it as serving the self, how can there be altruistic behavior? And he offers an explanation to say that, you know, when you help your fellow creature, you're helping those who share your genes. It makes evolutionary sense to develop a care for your fellow creature. Do you feel the same logic would extend to non-human animals?
I mean, I don't think that logic works even as far as Peter Singer takes it.
I see. So how would that circle expand to non-human animals then?
By non-genetic means. Right. I think that that he's actually right to want to expand the circle morally, but I think he's wrong to think that it really is the same process of evolution. That the expanding circle really does represent something evolutionary. It doesn't. As far as evolution is concerned, kin groups, kin and potential reciprocators are as far as it goes. The expansion is done by what I would call a mistake, a very blessed mistake, a very, very good mistake. But when we are altruistic towards non-relatives whom we're never ever going to meet again,
yes,
that is a byproduct, a mistaken, but I hasten to stress again, a very good mistake.
Yes, but I mean, you can see why. I think, as Singer points out in the expanding circle, the way that human beings were living at the time that these characteristics evolved, it made sense to treat any human being you meet as though they were a relative, because they likely were. But the same can't be said for non-human animals.
Nor can it be said for non-related humans. I mean, we've already expanded that far.
Yeah, and that was a purely cultural process. And
that was a purely cultural process, and so expanding it to non-humans is nothing to do with chimpanzees being more closely related to us than kangaroos.
I see. Yeah.
The question is, as Jeremy Bentham said, can they suffer?
Yes, and I mean, what do you think it will take? I'm interested because when you talk about moral progress, you give the example of the founding fathers in America having owned slaves. I mean, the pinnacles of liberty in liberal theory are also anathema to it, in the fact that they abuse that in the most cynical way possible. And you say, when talking of Thomas Jefferson and George Washington particularly, you say we can at least hope that they didn't know the conditions on the slave ships coming from Africa, implying that because we think so morally highly of people like George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and think they're so rational, that if they'd have known what the conditions were really like, then they perhaps would have changed their point. But like, in today's society, we do know the conditions of the equivalent. We do know the conditions of animals in factory farms, and that doesn't seem to be doing it. I mean, what do you think it will take?
That's a good point. I mean, in the case of Jefferson and Washington, I don't know much about it, but I presume that although they had slaves, they were probably quite kind to them, whereas the treatment of slaves on the ships was utterly ghastly, I mean, appalling. I very much hope they didn't know. But you make the point about, you know, when we see lorries transporting sheep or cows, they remind me of, you know,
yes,
railway trucks going to Belsen. I think there is a tendency to turn a blind eye, and there probably was in the 18th century towards the way slaves were treated, and there is now towards as you say, factory farms and slaughterhouses.
Yes,